Winter did not knock on the doors of Silver Hollow. It buried them. A lonely police chief returned to a mountain town with nothing but grief in his heart, and a German shepherd who refused to leave his side. When a forgotten letter led them into the frozen wilderness, they discovered a house no map remembered and a secret the mountain itself was trying to protect. What happened next would change an entire town and save lives in ways no one could have imagined. If you believe in quiet courage, loyal hearts, and second chances, stay with this story until the end. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and leave your city or country in the comments. Your presence here matters more than you know. Winter arrived early in Silver Hollow, Montana that year. By mid-November, the mountains had already closed their fists around the town, and snow moved through the valley like something alive, slow and patient, as if the land itself were learning how to hold its breath. The sky stayed pale for days at a time. Wind slid down from Raven Ridge and curled through the streets, filling doorways with ice and quiet. Silver Hollow had been built in the space between two forests and one long river that froze solid by December, a town of just under 3,000 souls who believed that survival was a form of prayer. It was into this silence that Ethan Cole returned. Ethan Cole was 44 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of body shaped by years of carrying responsibility rather than seeking attention. His hair had once been dark brown, but grief had threaded it with gray at the temples, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, not from age, but from absence. His face carried the calm authority of a man who had stood between danger and other people for most of his life. He had served in the military before joining the state police, and now he wore the badge of Chief of Police in Silver Hollow. The uniform fit him as if it had grown from his bones. He spoke little, listened carefully, and rarely smiled, though when he did, it softened his whole face. Something had changed him, though, in a way the town could sense but not name. 3 months earlier, Ethan's wife Lydia had died on a mountain road less than 30 miles from where he now parked his truck. The report said black ice, a single skid, a guardrail that failed. The accident happened before dawn, when the snow was still falling and the world had not yet decided whether to be awake. Ethan had learned of it by phone while on assignment in Helena. He had driven through the storm without stopping, his hands steady on the wheel, his chest hollow, his thoughts moving too slowly to form words. When he finally arrived, Lydia's body was already gone, the road clean, the snow hiding everything that had happened as if the mountain itself refused to remember. Lydia Cole had been 39, tall and slender, with dark auburn hair. She often wore loose over her shoulders and eyes the color of winter clouds. She had worked in the county records office as a senior archival specialist, a job that suited her careful nature. Lydia believed in details. She believed the smallest facts were the ones that kept the world from slipping apart. She spoke gently, moved slowly, and had a way of listening that made people tell the truth even when they had not planned to. She and Ethan had met in Silver Hollow 8 years earlier, when he first transferred there as a young officer. Her quiet steadiness had been the place where his restless life finally came to rest. When she died, something inside Ethan closed that did not reopen. The town had tried to help. They brought casseroles and sympathy cards and awkward hugs. Clara Whitmore, the postmaster, a short woman in her late 50s with iron gray hair and a voice shaped by decades of sorting other people's grief, had slipped an envelope into Ethan's hand and told him he didn't have to be strong all the time. He had thanked her. He always thanked people. He just never spoke about Lydia after that. He moved into a narrow room above the police station, slept on a mattress that creaked when he turned, and spent his nights staring at the ceiling while the wind wrote its long letters against the windows. The only being who refused to treat Ethan differently was Max. Max was a 6-year-old German shepherd, large and powerfully built, with a thick coat that faded from deep black along his spine to silver gray at his chest and legs. His muzzle had begun to frost with white, giving him an air of quiet authority. His eyes were amber, alert, and endlessly patient. Max had been Ethan's K-9 partner during his last years in service, trained in detection, tracking, and structural response. They had learned each other in dark places and loud ones, in heat and cold, in moments where breath had been the only thing between living and not. When Max was retired after a shoulder injury that healed but never fully disappeared, Ethan signed the papers without hesitation. There had never been a question of where Max would go. The dog followed Ethan home, and from that day on, wherever Ethan's shadow fell, Max's did too. On the morning the letter arrived, the storm had finally broken. Snow fell in soft sheets, thick and steady, muting the world. Ethan was drinking coffee at the small table near the window when he heard the mail slot open below. Max lifted his head immediately, ears forward. Ethan finished his cup, pulled on his coat, and went downstairs. The stack of mail waited on the counter. Utility notices, a flyer from the hardware store, and one envelope thicker than the rest, cream-colored. The edges worn as if it had traveled longer than necessary. The return address read, State Heritage and Records Division. Ethan frowned. Official letters rarely carried good news. He brought the mail upstairs and set it on the table. Max followed, moving with his usual quiet discipline, then stopped. He did not lie down. He stood between Ethan and the door, his body still, ears angled forward. Ethan noticed it immediately. "What is it, boy?" he asked, his voice low. Max did not look at him. His gaze remained fixed on the envelope. Ethan reached for his coat. Max shifted slightly, blocking the way. Not aggressive, just firm. It was new behavior. Max had never interfered with Ethan's movements before. Ethan exhaled, the kind of breath that carried exhaustion and humor both. "All right," he said. He picked up the envelope and opened it. Inside was a brief notice, written in precise language. Lydia Cole was listed as a secondary heir on a property recently cleared through archival review. The structure was located within a restricted zone on Raven Ridge. Non-residential classification. Unoccupied for decades. Coordinates followed. No photograph. No valuation. A house. Ethan read the letter twice, then a third time. Lydia had never mentioned it. She had never spoken of property or inheritance or anything on Raven Ridge beyond the weather report she filed each morning before he left for work. His first reaction was irritation. Some clerical mistake. Some forgotten file tied to her job. He folded the paper and placed it back in the envelope. Max lowered his head and pressed his nose against the table near the letter, breathing in as if scent might explain what words could not. His body was tense, not fearful, but alert in a way Ethan recognized from nights when danger had been close but invisible. Ethan's jaw tightened. He picked up the envelope and slid it into his coat pocket. "Fine," he said. "We'll look." They stepped outside into the falling snow. The wind had eased. The world felt quieter than it should have. As they walked toward the truck, Ethan glanced once toward the distant line of Raven Ridge, barely visible through the trees. He did not know why. Max already had. The dog's head was turned in that direction, ears lifted, listening to something Ethan could not hear. Ethan Cole had come home with a badge that still shone, a grief that did not, and a dog who refused to let him walk past certain questions. And for the first time since Lydia's death, something shifted inside his chest. Not hope, not purpose. Just the unsettling awareness that his life had not finished rearranging itself yet. Snow followed them up the mountain like a memory that refused to stay buried. By the time Ethan turned the truck off the main road and onto the narrow service trail that climbed toward Raven Ridge, the sky had flattened into a pale, unmoving sheet of white, and the trees pressed close on both sides as if listening. The engine's hum felt out of place in the stillness. When he finally stopped the truck at a shallow turnout, the silence closed around them so completely that even the ticking of cooling metal sounded loud. Ethan stepped out first. The cold bit through his gloves, sharp and clean. Max followed, landing softly in the snow, his thick black and silver coat already dusted white. He was alert but controlled, posture straight, ears high, amber eyes scanning the forest with practiced calm. 6 years old, large, powerful, and disciplined, Max looked less like a pet and more like a sentry who had been carved from the mountain itself. His shoulder bore the faint scar of his old injury, healed but never forgotten, a reminder of work done in places where mistakes were measured in lives. The coordinates from the letter led them away from the road, into the trees. Snow came up to Ethan's calves, the kind that swallowed sound and left only breath behind. They walked for nearly 20 minutes, the slope steepening, the forest thinning, the wind strengthening as they climbed. Ethan's lungs burned in the thin, cold air, but he did not slow. Max moved ahead, careful, deliberate, pausing now and then to look back at Ethan as if confirming that the man was still following. The first sign of the house was not the house at all. It was the way the mountain changed. The wind dropped suddenly, as if cut by an unseen wall. The snow on the ground became shallower, packed tight, almost polished. The trees stepped back. And there, folded into the slope, was a structure that should not have been there. It did not rise proudly. It did not announce itself. It lay half-buried in earth and stone, rooflines swallowed by the mountain, walls formed of thick, fitted rock darkened by age, but not by rot. Moss clung to the edges where moisture collected, but the joints between the stones were precise, careful, built by hands that had known exactly what they were doing. The front entrance was framed by heavy wooden beams, weathered smooth by decades of exposure, their grain dark and tight, no cracks large enough for wind to enter. Ethan stopped. For a long moment, he only stared. He had expected something abandoned, something ruined, a collapsed cabin or a forgotten shed. This was neither. This was intact. He stepped forward and placed his gloved hand against the stone. Cold, yes, but steady. Not the brittle cold of exposed rock, but the deep, patient cold of something that had learned how to hold winter without breaking. When he pushed against the door, it opened with surprising ease, the hinges silent, the wood heavy but obedient. Inside, the air changed. Not warm exactly, but even. Balanced. Ethan's breath did not fog. The smell was clean. Aged wood, dry earth, stone. No mold, no decay, no collapse. The floor beneath his boots was smooth stone, worn by time rather than damage. Narrow windows set deep into the walls admitted just enough light to outline the interior without inviting the cold. Max entered behind him, moving slowly, nose low, tail still. He circled once, then again, reading the space the way only a trained dog could, not with curiosity, but with attention. When he reached the far side of the main chamber, where a narrow passage sloped downward into darkness, his body stiffened. He stopped. No growl. No bark. He simply stood there, blocking the passage, ears forward, eyes fixed, posture locked with the kind of tension Ethan had seen only when danger hovered just beyond sight. Ethan felt it then, the tightening behind his ribs, the instinct that had kept him alive more than once. "All right," he murmured. "We're not going." Max did not move. They did not stay long that first visit. Ethan walked the main chamber, tested the walls, pressed his weight against the beams. Everything held. Too well. Before leaving, he closed the door behind them and slid the old metal latch into place, unsure why the gesture felt necessary. By the time they reached the truck again, dusk was already bleeding into the snow. The drive back down the mountain passed in silence. But something had followed Ethan out of the house, something he could not name, a sense of unfinished business that settled into him like a held breath. The town noticed. In a place as small as Silver Hollow, absence traveled faster than explanation. By the next morning, the questions had already begun. Ethan first felt it in the way people looked at him. Tom Haskins, a local mechanic in his early 50s, thick through the chest with hands permanently stained by oil, avoided Ethan's eyes on Main Street. Linda Rowe, the diner waitress in her early 40s with dark hair pulled into a tight knot and movements shaped by years of early mornings, hesitated before taking his order, her usual easy warmth replaced by something cautious and concerned. She asked quietly if everything was all right. The way she asked told him she already believed something was not. "You're staying up on the ridge," she said. Ethan shook his head. "Just looking at an old place." She nodded, but her gaze flicked toward the counter where two men sat, pretending not to listen. By the end of the week, the work dried up. The homeowner who had called Ethan every winter to clear snow canceled without explanation. Another said he had found someone else. A third told him plainly that he did not want trouble with the county or with anyone else. Ethan understood. Fear was easier to share than facts. The rumor hardened into something uglier. Ethan was squatting. Ethan was trying to claim land. Ethan was blocking development. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. He worked when he could and stayed quiet when he could not. The money thinned. He skipped meals without thinking about it. He sold his spare tools first, then the jacket he no longer wore. At night, he lay awake in the narrow room above the station, listening to the wind and the distant sound of trucks moving somewhere on the ridge. Max sensed the change. The dog stayed closer, positioning himself between Ethan and the door even during the day, his presence steady and reassuring. One afternoon, Ethan was called into the office of Harold Whitaker, the building owner in his late 60s, thin, nervous, with wire-rimmed glasses and a voice sharpened by worry. "People are asking questions," Harold said, tapping the desk. "About you, about that place on the mountain. I don't want inspectors or lawyers or trouble." Ethan nodded. He packed that night. The temperature dropped sharply the following day. Snow fell without warning, heavy and wet, coating the roads and swallowing sound. Ethan slept in the truck at the edge of town, engine idling just long enough to keep the cold from settling too deep. Max curled in the back, his body pressed against Ethan's legs, radiating warmth. That was when Ethan noticed where Max's attention was fixed. Not on the town, on the mountain. The next morning, Ethan drove back up. This time, he did not go alone. A Forest Service truck waited near the lower bend in the road. Beside it stood Mason Grant, a tall, lean man in his early 60s, beard cut short, hair silver at the temples, uniform faded from years of use. Mason had spent his life outdoors. His movements were unhurried. His eyes missed nothing. "You're the police chief," Mason said calmly. "With the dog." Ethan nodded. Max stepped out and stood at his side, posture neutral, alert. "That house up there," Mason continued, "hasn't seen anyone in a long time." Ethan waited. "People are nervous," Mason said. "Nervous people imagine things." Ethan glanced toward the ridge. "It's stable," he said. "More stable than it should be." Mason's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. "Some things survive because they were built to," he said. "Others because nobody wanted them badly enough." Mason stepped aside and let them pass. By the time Ethan reached the house again, snow was falling steadily. Inside, the air held the same calm, even balance. Ethan sat against the stone wall, Max settling beside him, the dogs breathing slow and controlled. Ethan thought of Lydia then, of the way she had lingered over old records, of the questions she had never pushed too hard, of the feeling that she had known more than she ever said. When they returned to town that evening, the looks followed them openly. Ethan had lost his room. He was losing his work. What remained was a house no one wanted, and a dog who refused to let him walk away from it. And as the snow thickened over Raven Ridge, Ethan understood something else. The house was not simply shelter, and staying silent would not keep anyone safe. The snow did not stop. It only changed its voice. Some mornings it fell in soft layers that hushed the world. Other days it came hard and sideways, driven by wind that cut through coats and settled into bones. Silver Hollow moved slower under its weight, the town's streets narrowing between banks of white, the storefronts dim, the river frozen into a single long scar of ice. For most people, winter meant endurance. For Ethan Cole, it meant isolation. He had returned from the ridge with the quiet certainty that the house was not just a building, and that Max had been right to stand guard over it. But certainty was a lonely thing when no one else shared it. The first man to speak to him openly about the rumors was Frank Delaney, owner of the small hardware store near the south end of town. Frank was in his late 50s, wide through the shoulders, with thinning hair he combed carefully and a voice shaped by years of calling over machinery. He had known Ethan since the day he arrived in Silver Hollow. When Ethan walked into the store that Tuesday morning, Frank did not greet him with his usual nod. Instead, he leaned against the counter and said, "They're saying you're planning to sell the ridge." Ethan stopped in the doorway. "Who's they?" Frank shrugged. "Everyone who's scared." Ethan said nothing. He paid for the nails and rope he needed, thanked Frank, and left. By noon, the story had grown. Someone said he was working with a mining company. Someone else claimed he was blocking development to force a payout. The more uncertain the details became, the more confident the town sounded. Fear had a way of filling empty spaces. On Thursday, the first truck arrived. It was clean, newer than most vehicles that traveled the mountain roads, painted a neutral gray that did not draw attention. It parked at the edge of the turnout below Raven Ridge and waited. Max noticed it immediately. His ears lifted, his body angling subtly between Ethan and the vehicle. The man who stepped out was in his early 40s, tall, broad-chested, with a face shaped by careful grooming rather than weather. His hair was dark blonde, cut short and precise, his jaw clean-shaven, skin smooth and unlined. He wore a heavy coat that had never known mud and boots polished enough to reflect light. He smiled easily, the practiced smile of someone accustomed to negotiations ending in his favor. "My name is Caleb Rowe," he said, extending a hand. Ethan did not take it. "I represent Northridge Resources." Ethan nodded once. Max remained still, eyes locked on Caleb, posture controlled but alert. "We've been surveying this area for a while," Caleb continued. "Your name came up in a recent records review. Looks like you have a claim on a structure up here, an old one." "I haven't claimed anything," Ethan replied. Caleb smiled as if that were exactly what he had expected. "That's the beauty of it. You don't have to. We're interested in simplifying matters. That house, that land, it's not zoned for residential use. No market value as it stands, but it sits in a zone we're evaluating. We'd like to purchase your interest and close the file." Caleb named a number. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to rent a small apartment, enough to eat without counting dollars, enough to step out of the cold and the stares and the whispered accusations, enough to disappear into a quieter life where no one measured his choices. Ethan felt the weight of it settle into his hands, like a tool he could choose to pick up or put down. Max shifted, his paws scraping softly against the gravel. His ears flattened for a moment, then lifted again as a distant sound reached them. Ethan followed his gaze. Somewhere beyond the bend, unseen machinery was moving. A low mechanical hum carried faintly through the trees. "Routine testing," Caleb said lightly, noticing the pause. "Nothing invasive yet." Ethan looked back at him. "What happens if I sell?" Caleb shrugged. "We proceed. You walk away clean. No obligations. No attention. You're a free man." Ethan thought of Lydia, of the way she used to read documents twice, sometimes 3 times, her brow creasing not in confusion, but in care. He thought of Max, of how the dog's reactions had grown sharper with every step closer to the house. He thought of the mountain itself, quiet and heavy, holding something that did not want to be disturbed. "I need time," Ethan said. Caleb nodded as if the answer had already been written. "Of course, I'll be around." The next few days tested Ethan in ways he had not anticipated. The cold deepened. Snow fell and did not melt. He slept in the truck again, the fuel gauge dropping faster than he liked. Food ran low. Pride did not warm him. Max did. Every time Ethan considered the offer, something happened. Once, Max refused to walk a familiar path. The dog pulled hard enough that Ethan stumbled just as the ground beneath his foot crumbled inward, loose soil sliding away to reveal a shallow sink beneath the snow. Ethan knelt, heart pounding, and pressed his palm to the exposed earth. It vibrated faintly, not from movement, but from pressure, like a held breath. Another time, at dusk, the hum returned closer. Max stiffened and let out a low sound from deep in his chest, a warning Ethan remembered from nights overseas when the air itself had seemed wrong. Ethan climbed higher, away from the noise, trusting the dog without understanding exactly why. When Ethan drove into town for supplies with the last of his cash, the looks were no longer subtle. Conversation stopped when he entered the store. A man he barely knew muttered something about selling out. Ethan did not correct him. The irony was bitter enough on its own. That evening, he returned to the house and sat on the stone floor, his back against the wall. Max lay beside him, head on his paws, eyes open. Ethan closed his eyes and let memory surface. Lydia had once told him that safety and comfort were not the same as peace. He had laughed then, not fully understanding. Now he did. He drove back to the turnout the next morning. Caleb was waiting. "You've thought about it," Caleb said, confident. Ethan nodded. He looked past Caleb toward the ridge, toward the unseen veins of stone and earth beneath their feet, toward the town below, roofs barely visible through the trees. "If you drill here," Ethan said, "you destabilize the slope." Caleb's smile tightened. "Our engineers have models." "Models miss things," Ethan replied. "This place isn't empty. It's holding something together." "With respect," Caleb said, "you're not qualified to make that assessment." Ethan met his gaze. "I've watched buildings fail. I've watched ground give way. And I trust my dog more than your models." Max stepped forward until he was aligned with Ethan's leg, body tense, ears forward. Caleb exhaled slowly. "Let me be clear. If you don't sell, we move forward anyway. Your claim complicates things, but it won't stop us. You'll be dragged into hearings, inspections. You'll lose what little standing you have left." Ethan thought of the money again, of warmth, of rest, of walking away. Then he thought of the house that breathed evenly while winter raged outside, of Max listening to the mountain, of Lydia's careful hands turning brittle pages, choosing not to ignore what others did. "I'm not selling," Ethan said. Caleb studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "That's unfortunate." The truck drove away, leaving tracks that scarred the snow. That night, the hum returned after midnight, deeper now, resonating through the stone floor of the house. Max rose instantly, pressing his body against the wall as if listening through bone. Ethan placed his hand against the same surface. The vibration was unmistakable. The mountain was under strain, and someone was about to make it worse. By dawn, the decision had settled into him fully. He would not walk away, not because he believed he could win, but because leaving would mean becoming part of what was coming. Safety could be purchased. Conscience could not. The storm arrived without ceremony. There was no thunder, no warning from the sky, only a sudden stillness that settled over Raven Ridge as if the mountain itself had drawn a long breath and held it. The wind dropped. The forest froze in place. Snow that had been drifting lazily through the branches thickened, turning heavy, sharp, and relentless. By the time Ethan Cole reached the narrow turnout below the ridge, visibility had collapsed into a tunnel of white. He shut off the engine and sat for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, listening to the quiet thud of snow against the windshield. Max shifted in the passenger seat, his posture changing from watchful to alert. The German Shepherd's ears lifted, amber eyes narrowing toward the darkness beyond the hood. 6 years old, broad-chested and thick-coated, with silver along his muzzle and a scar on his shoulder from work done years ago, Max looked less like a dog and more like a sentry carved from winter itself. Ethan pulled on his gloves and opened the door. The cold hit him immediately, sharp enough to steal the breath from his lungs. Snow rushed in around his boots, already ankle-deep and rising. The path toward the house had vanished beneath the storm. He knew the way by memory now. The slope of the land, the turn of the trees, the quiet place where the mountain changed its voice. They moved upward slowly. The wind returned without warning, driving the snow sideways, blinding and heavy. Ethan leaned into it, boots slipping, shoulders hunched against the cold. Max stayed close, never more than a step away, his body angled to shield Ethan from the worst of the gusts. The house emerged from the storm the way it always did, not rising from the snow, but revealing itself, as if the mountain were pulling back a veil. Half buried in earth and stone, walls of fitted rock dark and steady, the structure looked unchanged by the violence around it. Snow slid off its roof in heavy sheets, the thick beams at the entrance catching the wind and breaking its force. Ethan reached the threshold and paused to catch his breath. That was when his foot betrayed him. Ice hid beneath the fresh snow, smooth and merciless. His boot slipped sideways, and the world tilted. He went down hard, the impact driving the breath from his lungs, in a white-hot burst of pain. His left leg screamed in protest as it twisted beneath him, sharp and immediate, the kind of pain that does not ask questions before it arrives. For a moment, he lay there, staring up at the falling snow. The storm swallowed sound. The lantern light inside the house blurred. Cold began its patient work. Ethan tried to move. His leg refused. Panic followed close behind, but training kept it contained. He rolled onto his side and tried to crawl. His gloves slipped against the ice. Snow soaked into his coat. The cold reached deeper, wrapping around bone, slowing thought, numbing fear. Then Max was there. The dog burst through the doorway with a force Ethan had never seen him use indoors. Max skidded to a stop beside him, teeth closing around the collar of Ethan's jacket. The German Shepherd pulled once, hard, dragging Ethan inches at a time across the ice toward the entrance. When the fabric tore, Max adjusted his grip and pulled again, using his full weight. His strength precise and unyielding. Ethan groaned, pain flaring, but he did not resist. He trusted the dog the way he always had, without question. The threshold drew closer. Snow piled around them. When Max finally dragged him inside, the dog did not stop. He continued pulling until Ethan was fully across the stone floor, away from the cold air spilling through the open door. Ethan lay gasping, vision swimming. Max stood over him, body rigid, then lowered himself alongside Ethan, pressing close, sharing warmth. The dog's breathing was steady, controlled. He stayed there, unmoving, until the shivering eased. If Max had not come, Ethan realized, he would have frozen there. The thought settled heavily, undeniable. The night stretched on. The storm howled against the house, but the walls held. Inside, the temperature barely shifted. The air moved gently, evenly, the way it always did, as if the structure were breathing for both of them. Ethan drifted in and out of consciousness, pain anchoring him to the present. Max did not move. When morning came, light filtered through the narrow windows, pale and cold. Ethan woke stiff and aching, his left leg swollen and burning with pain. He tested it carefully. Standing was possible, walking would be slow. He pushed himself upright and looked around the space that had kept him alive. Thick walls, stone floor, heavy beams, the quiet intelligence of the design. Without this place, he thought, people would die. The realization did not arrive with drama. It came as a simple truth that refused to be ignored. He limped deeper into the house, near the far wall where the stone met packed earth. He noticed something he had not seen before. A seam, subtle and deliberate, visible only when the light struck at a certain angle. The surface there was smoother, shaped by hands that had known exactly where to stop. Max followed him, posture changing the moment Ethan touched the wall. The dog's ears lifted. His body went still, focused, watchful. Ethan fetched a pry bar from his pack and worked carefully. Whoever had sealed the panel had not rushed. The earth came away in pieces, revealing darkened wood beneath, reinforced and fitted with care rather than panic. When the panel loosened, it did not fall. It opened. Behind it was a narrow chamber carved directly into the mountain, no wider than Ethan's shoulders. The air inside was cooler, denser, untouched by the gentle circulation of the main house. Max leaned forward and sniffed once, then sat back on his haunches, calm, alert. Ethan removed the contents one by one and carried them into the light. Blueprints came first, yellowed but intact, rolled carefully, bound with stiffened twine. He unrolled them across the stone floor. Cross-sections of the house revealed layered levels, airflow channels, angled corridors designed to move heat upward and cold air away. Thermal mass calculations were annotated in tight, disciplined handwriting. This was not a cabin. This was engineering. Beneath the blueprints lay a leather-bound journal. The cover was cracked, the edges softened by time. Inside, the handwriting was precise, economical, the kind used by someone trained to think in systems rather than stories. Lieutenant Daniel Whitaker, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Ethan recognized the format immediately. Dates, measurements, soil density, load distribution. The early entries were optimistic, technical descriptions of materials and methods. The mountain had been chosen deliberately, not for isolation alone, but for stress, cold, pressure, endurance testing without reliance on external power. As Ethan turned the pages, the tone shifted. Subsurface instability noted. Minor collapse during test cycle. Emergency reinforcement. Personnel trapped. One extraction successful, one fatality. The project was halted shortly after. Deferred, the journal said. Deferred meant buried. The final entry was brief. If this structure remains intact, it will be because the mountain allowed it. Ethan closed the journal slowly. Something slipped free from beneath it. An envelope newer than the rest. His chest tightened before he even saw the handwriting. Lydia. Her writing was unmistakable, slightly slanted, neat, warm. The way she wrote grocery lists, notes on the refrigerator, reminders he always forgot to follow. Ethan's hands trembled as he opened it. Ethan, if you're reading this, it means you stayed longer than I was able to. I did not know everything, but I knew enough to be afraid of leaving it alone. This house is not a gift. It is a responsibility. If you listen to Max, and if you listen to yourself, you will understand why I could not walk away. I am sorry I did not tell you sooner. Ethan folded the letter and pressed it to his chest. Grief moved through him then. Sharp, clean, different from the dull ache he had carried since Lydia's death. She had known. She had been preparing. And now she was gone. Max rose and placed his head against Ethan's knee. You knew, Ethan whispered. The dog did not respond, but he did not pull away. Morning arrived without color. Snow still fell, but now it did so quietly, as if the storm had said everything it needed to say and was retreating into itself. The ridge lay under a pale sheet of white, the sky low and unblinking. Ethan Cole moved slowly through the house, favoring his injured leg, each step measured, each breath sharp in his chest. Max stayed close, adjusting his pace to Ethan's without command, the German shepherd's thick coat catching flakes of snow that melted against his warmth. Pain sharpened Ethan's awareness. He noticed things he had missed before. The way the air moved through the house in a steady, patient rhythm. The way the stone floor near the inner wall held warmth longer than the outer edges. The way Max refused, absolutely refused, to cross into the lowest sloping passage, even when Ethan coaxed him gently with his voice. That refusal stayed with him. 2 days later, while clearing snow that had blown into a narrow corridor, Ethan noticed a seam in the wall. It was subtle, almost invisible unless the light struck at just the right angle. The packed earth there was smoother, shaped deliberately, as if someone long ago had known exactly where to stop. Max halted behind him. The dog's posture changed. Ears lifted, body perfectly still, focused in a way that made the hairs on Ethan's arms rise. Ethan fetched a pry bar from his pack and worked carefully. The layer of earth came away in pieces, revealing darkened wood beneath, reinforced and sealed with care rather than haste. When the panel finally loosened, it did not fall. It opened. Behind it lay the chamber. Cooler air, denser, untouched by the gentle circulation of the main house. Ethan removed its contents into the light. The yellowed blueprints, the leather-bound journal of Lieutenant Daniel Whitaker, the final page that spoke of collapse and sacrifice, and Lydia's letter, the truth she had carried alone. By the time Ethan finished reading, the decision had already taken shape inside him. He would not leave. Not now. Not after this. He began to map the house. With no formal training, no authority, only patience and attention, Ethan sketched airflow patterns using smoke from smoldering pine needles, tracking temperature changes by touch and time. He marked where the stone held warmth, where vibration lingered faintly beneath the floor. Max became his guide. The dog led him away from sections of ground that hummed with unseen pressure. When Ethan followed Max's signals, he found hairline cracks hidden beneath dust, soil packed too tightly where stress had shifted. Max was not predicting danger. He was reacting to it. Ethan drove down to town seeking confirmation. He found Mason Grant near the ranger station, splitting firewood with methodical swings. Up close, Mason looked older than Ethan had realized. His beard was more gray, his hands thick with scars earned from decades of weather and labor. Mason paused when he saw Ethan's limp. "You look like hell," Mason said mildly. Ethan told him everything. The blueprints, the journal, the warnings buried in Whitaker's handwriting, Lydia's letter. Mason listened without interruption, then studied the documents laid out across the hood of Ethan's truck. "My father worked maps like these," Mason said finally. "Cold War structures. Most failed. Some were never finished. A few were left behind because tearing them down was riskier than leaving them alone. If they drill," Ethan said, "they destabilize the whole slope." Mason looked toward Raven Ridge and then toward the town below. "They won't stop on their own," Mason said. The warning came sooner than either of them expected. Ethan was in town 3 days later, scraping together supplies he could barely afford when Max's behavior changed sharply. The dog stiffened, ears snapping forward, then surged toward the edge of the small playground behind the community hall. Children were there, bundled in coats, laughter bright against the cold. A little boy, no more than 7, wandered closer to the tree line where the snow thinned and the ground dropped away. "Max!" Ethan shouted, heart slamming. Max broke free. The German Shepherd ran full speed, skidding to a stop beside the child. He grabbed the back of the boy's jacket in his teeth and pulled him hard, dragging him several feet away. Seconds later, the ground gave way. There was no explosion, no roar. Only a deep cracking sound, like ice breaking on a lake, followed by a sudden inward drop as earth folded into itself. Snow, dirt, and stone slid down into the widening depression where the child had been standing moments before. Screams followed. Adults ran. Ethan reached the boy and Max at the same time, pulling the child into his arms. The boy shook, unharmed, eyes wide with shock. Max stood rigid, body between them and the collapse, a low sound vibrating in his chest. Not aggression, but alarm. Sirens arrived quickly, fire trucks, police. People gathered in stunned clusters, staring at the torn ground. The boy's mother collapsed to her knees, sobbing as she clutched her son. She looked at Ethan and Max with disbelief and gratitude tangled together. The town changed in that moment. Questions replaced whispers. Fear replaced denial. Engineers were called. Officials arrived. The area was cordoned off. For the first time, county representatives came up the mountain themselves. They stood near the house on Raven Ridge, boots crunching in the snow, eyes fixed on the markers Ethan had placed days earlier. One of them, Karen Holt, early 40s, square-shouldered with wire-rimmed glasses and a face drawn tight by fatigue, knelt and pressed her gloved hand against the ground. "This shouldn't be happening this close to town," she said. Ethan said nothing. Max sat beside him, tail still, eyes never leaving the ridge. Northridge's trucks arrived later, their confidence visibly shaken. Caleb Rowe avoided Ethan's gaze. Lawyers spoke in careful phrases. Apologies were issued without admitting fault. That evening, a man in a heavy coat pulled Ethan aside. His name was Robert Hale, a risk assessor hired by the county late 60s, face lined deeply, hands trembling slightly when he gestured. "You have grounds," Robert said quietly. "Negligence, endangerment. You could file suit, significant damages." Ethan listened. He understood what was being offered: money, compensation, security, a future no longer measured in cold nights and empty pockets. That night, Ethan sat alone in the house. Max slept nearby. Ethan thought of Lydia's letter, of Whitaker's final entry, of the child's jacket clenched in Max's teeth, of the people in town who could not leave even if they wanted to. The next morning, Ethan made his decision. At the follow-up meeting, he declined to pursue legal action. The room went quiet. Caleb stared at him in disbelief. Karen frowned, clearly confused. Instead, Ethan made one demand. "Shut it down," he said. "Suspend extraction. Preserve the slope. Study it properly, not for profit, for safety." Karen looked at him carefully. "And what do you want in return?" Ethan shook his head. "Nothing." The decision cost him. Any chance at financial relief vanished. Any settlement that might have secured his future evaporated. He returned to Raven Ridge poorer than before, carrying only his notebook, the journal, Lydia's letter, and Max at his side. But something else changed. People began to come up the ridge. Not officials, neighbors. Mason brought supplies. The boy's mother brought food. A man Ethan barely knew offered tools. No one said hero. They simply showed up. As night fell, Ethan stood in the doorway of the house, watching lantern light flicker across familiar faces. Max lay at his feet, finally relaxed, eyes half closed. Ethan Cole remained poor. He remained tired. But the mountain was quiet again, and the town below slept more safely than it had in years. The storm announced itself days before it arrived. The sky over Silver Hollow turned the color of old steel, pressing low against the mountains, and the air grew unnaturally still, as if the world were holding its breath. Even before the forecast confirmed what was coming, Ethan Cole felt it in his bones. Max felt it sooner. The German shepherd's pacing returned, not frantic, but deliberate. His ears lifted at sounds that had not yet reached human hearing. He stopped sleeping near the inner wall and moved closer to the doorway. His body angled toward the ridge as if preparing for something larger than any storm they had yet faced. By the second night, snow fell without pause. Wind followed, howling through the trees with a force that bent branches and erased paths. Roads vanished beneath drifts. Power failed early in the evening, plunging the town below into darkness. One by one, lantern lights appeared on the ridge. Families made their way upward, guided by memory, by rope lines Ethan and the volunteers had set days earlier, and by Max, who moved ahead of each small group with steady confidence, stopping often to look back and make sure no one lagged behind. Children clutched blankets and stuffed animals. Elderly couples moved slowly, helped by neighbors who had once barely exchanged greetings. Fear was everywhere, but so was something else. Trust. Inside the house, the air held steady, as it always did, neither hot nor cold, just enough to let shoulders loosen and breathing slow. The walls absorbed the violence of the wind. The stone floor carried warmth that no fire could have provided. The mountain did not fight the storm, it held it. Ethan moved through the space quietly, directing people to the middle level, distributing food, checking faces for signs of shock or cold. His injured leg throbbed with every step, but he ignored it. Pain had become background noise to something far larger. Karen Holt arrived soaked with snow, her coat rimmed with ice, her hair pulled back tightly as if tied in haste. She carried a radio that crackled uselessly in her hand. "This is worse than projected," she said, her voice steady but tight. "Roads are completely impassable. Emergency crews are grounded." Ethan nodded. "Then this is where we stay." They stayed. Hours passed. Then the night deepened. Wind battered the hillside, but the house absorbed it. The layered walls muted the violence outside. People cooked together on small stoves, sharing food without counting who had brought what. Mason Grant sat near the wall, sharpening a knife more out of habit than need, his weathered face calm. Lila Monroe, a woman in her mid-30s whose long illness had thinned her to the edge of fragility, wrapped her arms around her 8-year-old daughter Hannah as the child slept against her shoulder, finally safe enough to dream. Max lay at the center of it all. Children gathered around him instinctively, hands brushing through his thick black and silver fur. He accepted the attention with patience, eyes half closed, body relaxed but alert. When a sudden gust rattled the outer door, Max lifted his head, ears high, then settled again when nothing followed. The children laughed softly, the sound light against the storm. At the height of the night, when the wind screamed loud enough to drown thought, the house shifted slightly. Not in danger, just enough to remind Ethan of the pressure it carried. He pressed his palm against the inner wall, feeling the familiar steady warmth beneath the stone. The system held, the mountain held. No one died that night. Morning came slowly. The storm did not end abruptly. It sawed itself into silence, leaving the world buried beneath white. When daylight filtered through the narrow windows, it revealed tired faces, red eyes, and something else beneath the exhaustion. relief, gratitude, connection. People stepped outside cautiously, helping one another navigate the drifts. The town below was damaged. Roofs collapsed, trees downed, power lines tangled and broken, but there were no bodies, no ambulances, no sirens carrying grief instead of urgency. Ethan stood near the doorway, watching the sun catch on fresh snow. Mac sat beside him, tail resting against Ethan's boot. Karen joined them, pulling off her gloves. "You saved lives," she said, quietly. Ethan shook his head. "We did it together." Later that day, as people prepared to descend when the roads reopened, they stopped by the inner wall one by one. Some shook Ethan's hand. Others hugged him briefly, awkwardly, unsure of what was appropriate. No one spoke of heroism. They spoke of warmth, of safety, of being seen. Before the house emptied, Ethan did one small thing. He took Lydia's letter from his pack and pinned it carefully to the wall near the center of the house, protected by a simple frame Mason had made from scrap wood. He did not read it aloud. He did not explain it. When Hannah asked whose letter it was, Ethan knelt beside her. "Someone who loved this place," he said, "and believed in people." Hannah nodded, as if that was explanation enough. Weeks passed. Winter settled fully into the mountains. The house became known. Not formally, not with signage or ceremony, but in the way people spoke of it. The Ridge Shelter, the warm place, Max's house. Volunteers rotated through, keeping supplies stocked, paths marked. Ethan remained, still taking odd jobs, still counting dollars, still mending what broke. He did not become wealthy. He did not leave the mountain. But when storms came, lights appeared again on the ridge. And when they did, people knew where to go. One evening, long after the worst of winter had passed, Ethan sat alone inside the house. Max lay nearby, paws twitching in sleep. Ethan looked at the letter on the wall and felt the ache he had lived with for so long loosen just a little. Love, he realized, did not end when a life did. It changed shape. It became responsibility. It became a place others could stand when the world turned cruel. Ethan Cole had returned from war with nothing. No home, no certainty, only a loyal dog and grief that felt endless. What he had now was not riches. It was something quieter, stronger. A community that had learned to protect itself. A mountain that had been listened to instead of conquered. A house that held when it mattered most. And a German shepherd who had never once been wrong. The miracle was not the house. It was the choice to stay together. Sometimes God does not remove the storm from our lives. Instead, He places us exactly where we are needed so we can endure it together. This story reminds us that miracles are not always loud. They are often quiet choices. The choice to stay. The choice to protect. The choice to love even when the heart is tired. In our daily lives, we all face moments when walking away feels easier. But when we choose to stand for what is right, God builds something stronger than comfort. He builds peace. He builds purpose. He builds community. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what this story reminded you of. Subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing stories that heal and inspire. May God bless you, protect your steps, and strengthen your heart. If you believe in His miracles and the power of love, please comment, Amen.